Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to today's presentation, Developing Ungrading for a 100-plus student course. I would now like to welcome our presenter, Courtney Sobers.
As was said, I am Courtney Sobers. My pronouns are she, her. I am an assistant teaching professor at Rutgers Newark in the chemistry department. And I apologize for the mask. We ended up having a house emergency, so I needed to keep myself safe. But yeah, so I'm going to talk about how I've developed ungrading for courses with over 100 students. Yes, the title is word salad because I wrote it when I was tired. But I also talk about this a lot on my personal Twitter feed, which you can see my handles there at the bottom. I also run an Instagram account for the General Chemistry Lab, which is the course I'm currently doing ungrading in. So you can kind of check that out if you want, just to see how I'm using it. But let's get into it because I want to give a lot of time for questions and any interaction. So how did I end up at ungrading, and how did I end up doing it with over 100 students? So I started off like most grad students, where I mentored one student at a time. By the time I graduated, I ended up having about 6 to 7 students I had worked with. Then I had moved on to an adjunct position at a community college, where I kind of taught what now I consider to be very small courses of 30 students. And I taught chemistry, and then I taught something I knew nothing about, meteorology. And that was really kind of what forced me to start thinking about what I was doing with my teaching. Then I got a full-time job at a small private university. My class sizes doubled, but I introduced the element of summer teaching, which, if you are unfamiliar, you take a 12 to 16-week course and condense it down to about 5 to 7 weeks. So that was a very small student enrollment, but it's very fast. And then finally, I ended up here at Rutgers, where my class sizes increased by an order of magnitude. And I'm still teaching the summer courses. And the one I'm going to talk about today is the course I'm teaching right now, which is my first fully ungraded course, which is General Chemistry Lab. Let me flip that over there. Okay. So I do have a couple of polls. So if you have a phone, you can use your camera app. And if you aim it at the QR code, it'll pop up a link if you hold it there for a little bit. If not, if you can open a new tab at slido.com and the number's there, just to kind of get a vibe of what the audience is like today. And so I'll give that about 30 seconds because I know sometimes opening a new tab is a little bit of a thing because it gets lost super fast. Okay, so I'll give it about another, let's say 15 seconds just for anybody who's still trying to pull up the website or get your phone out and all that stuff. Okay, so I'll wait another 2. All right, interesting. Okay, so we have a very, very new audience here, which is awesome, which is great. Welcome. So if you are the I've never heard of it category, I would love to point you to this book that just came out, I think, last year. It's called Ungrading: Why Rating Students Undermines Learning and What to Do Instead, edited by Susan Bloom. I did put a link below if you want to go to the website where you can order it. It's a great introduction into what ungrading is. This talk kind of skips over a little bit of that, and I'm going to get more into the how do you do it element, which also, if you want to see somebody who's been doing it a lot longer than I have, there's Clarissa Sorensen Unruh. She talks a little bit more about other ways you can do ungrading because it is kind of an umbrella term. So if you're not super familiar, it can be very confusing. So I'll give a little bit of time if anybody wants to write down the endings to those go.rutgers.edu links. Okay. So to talk about ungrading, we first have to talk about grading and what exactly grades mean. So for the context of my class, all of the work in the class requires working with a partner. We have synchronous Zoom sessions, but they are optional, but we also don't record them. Because of the format of the class, we're not really doing a lot of lecturing. We're kind of just there to troubleshoot. So if you have the discussion forum open and you're willing to share, tell me what your response is to these prompts. And I ask my students these prompts as well. So student A submits all their work on time. All the answers are correct. but they never respond to their partner because they're supposed to share data with their partner. So their partner can't finish the lab until they get their data. And the student never attends class. And so what grade do you give that student? So my student's response to that was, yeah, they should get an A because everything's right. But because they left their partner hanging, they're getting a B plus at best, right? So now we're using a grade as a punishment for violating a social norm. Like, you left your partner hanging. Doesn't matter if you understood the material, you left somebody kind of hanging. Student B, and I see some of you are also team B, the student B doesn't submit any work until the last 4 weeks of the course, and then they submit everything they've missed, and they keep up with everything else that's happening in the class, and it's some of the best work you've ever seen. And so what grade do you give that student? When I asked my students this, their response was, well, can we get more information? Like, were there due dates on the assignments? How late was the work? Did they communicate with you, or did they just all of a sudden submit stuff? And I was like, well, it's a grade, right? Like, why are we asking questions about their personal life if it's a grade? So yeah, getting the would it depend on due date and the circumstances B plus that. So then I was like, okay, fine. The student gives you an explanation that there was a personal issue. They had to become the breadwinner in their household due to COVID, something that they had no control over, and they just got the chance to catch up on all the schoolwork they missed. So now all my students were like, well, they definitely deserve an A because that means they were committed to the class, that they made up all that work they missed. But some students were also like, well, if they didn't tell you this was going on, then they still don't get the A because they've missed all that work and they didn't give you an excuse. So now it's like grades are related to someone's personal circumstances, and that feels really invasive. So you have a third student. They're completely lost for the first four to 5 weeks of the course, but then they figure it out and they start doing well. Like, either they didn't quite get the style of the instructor, and so they didn't know how to answer questions properly, but after the first exam, it starts to click. So what grade do they get? Now, this question, this proposed student got the most response from my students because they were like, we've been that student. We're like, we tanked that first exam, and even though we did really awesome the rest of the course, unless you have some kind of exam grade replacement, they're just forever stuck with like a lowered grade. Even if you could ask them at the end, can you explain what you missed? They'd say yes. So students were like, it should be an A, but we know it's not going to be. It's going to be something more like a B or C, right? Yeah, so whatever grade their work is earning, bump from what they had earned, you try to reward it at the end. But now grades are getting complicated because the student figured it out. Shouldn't we say, if you got it and you could explain the whole course by the end, that's an A, just because you didn't get it when we first covered it? Does that seem right to give that student a B? And the final student is they struggle with the material. Their answers are always missing a little something, but they're really engaged. They submit all their work on time. They share the data. They communicate with their partner. They attend class. They ask questions, go to office hours. And so the students are all like, well, that student's really trying. They should probably also get like a high grade, even though the quality of their work isn't where we want. And so these are just 4 different scenarios, and it gets really complicated as to what is and is not a grade. And so there was a conversation on Twitter back in early February where someone had asked, Aaron Whittick actually had asked, why did the authors in the Ungrading book use the word ungrading instead of decentering grading? And so Susan Bloom, who again was the editor of the book, said, and I'm just going to highlight part of her tweet, it's to undo many of the harmful but familiar dimensions of institutional education. And she's talking about grades here, at least in this element. And if you don't think grades are harmful, if you don't think that evaluating someone on personal circumstances or as revenge or punishment for not adhering to some course norms necessarily, this was a tweet by Ben Sitchy. I'm not sure how to say his name. People thought he was involved with the most recent Mars rover landing. And so he tweeted, I got a 2.4 GPA my first semester in college, thought I wasn't maybe cut out for engineering. STEM is hard for everyone. Grades ultimately aren't what matter. Curiosity and perseverance do. And it's like, okay, well, if grades don't matter, why do we defend them so aggressively when people ask us, if somebody says, well, why don't you just give everybody an A, right? And if you don't think grades are harmful, why does somebody who's probably at least a year out of college still remember their GPA from their first semester in college, right? And if you've ever had a student evaluation, the bad ones stick with you a lot better than the good ones do. And so that is harmful. Like that has a toll on your mental health and everything else. And the last comment from that conversation, which if you have a chance to find it, I should have linked it, is from Rissa Sorensen Unruh. And she says at the end, that ungrading is not totally the opposite of grading. It's more the systematic undoing of grading. And what's hidden in that sentence is it creates an opportunity for equity in your classroom. So if you have that student who all of a sudden had to become the breadwinner, but they really want to take these courses, they're really willing to be engaged, for whatever reason, maybe they can't afford the financial aid to take it again later, ungrading gives them the space to do what they need to do. And I've seen this in my class this semester even. And so to explain my mindset around ungrading, because I'm not an idealist, and if you read the ungrading book, you'll see a lot of idealist thoughts. And so we're going back to Slido, and my question to you is, what word comes to mind when you hear organic chemistry? And I will, while I wait for that to get sponsored, because it should be a word cloud. How does this compare to mastery-based grading? So mastery-based grading fits under the ungrading umbrella because it's all about de-emphasizing the grade and focusing on student learning. That's why I say ungrading is a really broad term because it includes a lot of stuff. Some careers ask for transcripts. That's right, some careers do. But we also know that students from, what is it called, Hampshire College get jobs even though they don't have grades, right? So it's possible to get around that. It is possible to get around not having a grade or a traditional transcript. I know there's a push right now for a system of mastery-based transcripts, which is, I don't know all the details. I have to find the website for you if you want to know about it. I can look it up later. But okay, so we've got people saying that organic chemistry is hard, it's stress. And here's the thing, difficult pre-med, mech, okay. And I understand why it's hard. Well, let me say that a different way. I love organic chemistry. It's what made me change my major from computer science to chemistry, okay? So it wasn't until I started teaching organic chemistry that I realized that most people felt like it was hard and difficult and stressful. And it was because, yeah, if you're a pre-health student, this is make or break for your career, right? If you can't pass organic chemistry, good luck getting into whatever med school or vet school or dental school you want. You might as well find a new career path or take this class over and over again until you get that A. And it's like, if that's the case, then no wonder people are terrified. But when I take organic chemistry, I see this. So I just see a bunch of games. I thought it was a bunch of puzzles. I was like, this is so fun. So if you think about modern day video games and board games, like Borderlands or Zelda, they don't come with those instruction manuals anymore, right? Like there's no more like A button means jump, B button means, like, first of all, you download them to your device most of the time. So there's no physical anything. But if you play the game, you have a couple of options. Maybe there's a tutorial in the beginning that shows you how you do things. Maybe it just says start walking, and as you encounter something, it'll give you a cutscene and say, hey, hit this button to get through this part. Or you get like a little private area off to the side where nobody can hurt you and you can practice whatever skills you need to get through the game. And this is kind of how I think of a classroom. And in these games, they have mini battles against new creatures, new characters, whatever. And then you hit the level boss. And there's a good chance that you are going to die at the level boss, unless you're one of those lucky people. I'm terrible at video games, so I always die the first time. And then you go back to your save point if you're lucky enough to have a game that has a save point, and you try again. But in our classrooms, we don't do that. They hit the level boss, which is your exams, and then we say, okay, well, if you die, we'll bring you back to life, but you have to keep going, but that's going to follow you the whole way. And you only get one shot to do it. And so it forever haunts them. It gets really stressful to be like, if I die again, the game is over for me. And even in board games like Pandemic, and there's another one I can't think of, I think Exploding Kittens, the instruction manual says, here are some steps. Now go play the game. And when you inevitably lose or die, come back to these instructions and we'll tell you the rest. Because student, you need the context in order to really understand what's happening. And so ungrading allows students to have a safe place to try to beat the level boss. And if they don't beat it the first time, go back to where they were best the last time they were really good and try again, right? And go through the quizzes and the homeworks and all that stuff. And so that's kind of how I approach ungrading. So what does it look like in my class right now? Because that's what we're all here for, right? So the first couple of weeks, I talked about what grades mean and how they're used. The same thing I did in this talk. I defined ungrading, and every week I give them a link or a video to something that talks about ungrading so that if they want to understand more about it, they can do that. But also that, oh, my brain just froze. I'm sorry. that kind of week, right? But it also shows that I'm not making this up. Like, I'm not just like, hey guys, I want to do something weird with you. It's like, no, other people are doing this and it's working and it has good outcomes. So here you go. Yes, you also get starter rounds, and that's so important, right? And when you start a class in college, you get 16 weeks. Your starter round is week 1. But yeah, so after the first couple of weeks, now after they've had a few labs, I ask them to reflect on their performance, and I say, define your A, right? Because at the end of the day, I do have to give them a final grade. I can't completely get away from it. So as much as I love to call it ungrading, at the end of the day, there's going to be a letter grade, there's going to be a transcript. But because we know that grades are so personal, I asked them, what does your A look like? Knowing your personal circumstances and what the course is asking of you, what does your A look like? And then I ended up having to cancel a lab, and I used that week to have the students meet with their TA one-on-one. So I should mention, I have about 330 students in my class right now, and I have about 30 TAs. And so I had the students meet with the TAs one-on-one to talk about the course or anything else that may be impacting their performance. Then last week, I just had them do their first grade reflection, where I asked them a series of questions to kind of get them thinking about what is Dr. Sobers going to look at when she's trying to figure out my grade. And then I include some questions where they can talk about anything else. And then based on then they had to give themselves a grade and justify it. So this is kind of based off performance review style, where it's like set a goal, assess how far, like work towards the goal, assess how your progress is towards the goal, and that kind of deal. And I met with the students one-on-one where if I didn't agree with the grade they gave themselves, so we could talk about why. So, and these are quick stats. I've done no processing besides literally percentages, but about half the class, I agreed with the grade they gave themselves. Another 12% overgraded themselves. So they either went, like, if I said it was a B, they said a B plus or an A. And most of those were students who were scared that this midterm grade was going to be averaged into their final grade. So they didn't want to give themselves a low grade because they wouldn't be able to recover. Or they interpreted it as, what grade are you working towards? Where I meant it as, if the course ended today, what would your grade be? So that was a communication issue there. So for a lot of those overgraders, about 15% of the students undergraded themselves. So I would have given them a higher grade than they gave themselves, which is a common thing you'll see in ungrading. And then there's another 15% of students who didn't submit the midterm reflection, or I haven't gotten around to giving them a grade to compare if we would agree or not, just because I got tired. I didn't anticipate how much time it would take, and I got tired. And so I kind of was like, if you submitted it late, it just didn't get seen. And then the end of the class is going to be another reflection with one-on-one meetings as necessary. And I haven't decided if I'll put anything else between now and the end of the course. So here's an example of what one of the labs looks like. And so I'm going to do a quick zoom in. So I said ungrading, but the system we're using still has points. Okay, can't get away from the points. It is what it is. So what I use the points for is to explain to students what requires a deeper understanding. So asking them the molarity or the average molarity is 2 points because it's algebraic formula, right? You should know this if you take an algebra. But if you look at the bottom question, which is probably small on your screen, it says, why is it generally easier to put the standard solution in the burette versus the unknown solution? And it's worth 10 points. And that's my way of saying this involves understanding, because you have to know what a standard is, what a burette is, what a titration is, what an unknown is, and how they all relate, right? So you can't just kind of go, boop, boop, here's my calculator, done. You have to actually understand. If they answer the question, we give them full credit, no matter what their answer is, just to let them know, hey, we read it, now you have feedback. The feedback, whether the answer is good or bad, is always there. If it's good, we say, it's good because you did this. If it's not good, we say, hey, can you address these things that we're looking for? The difference between the question that's in yellow and the questions above it is the yellow question gets the feedback after 48 hours. The other questions get feedback, but it's on like a week to a week and a half time frame, because my TAs are also students, because I have graduate students and I have non-graduate students. And so I have to give them time to get grades in. So yeah, so that's what one of the labs looks like. And so things I know that I always wonder about when people talk about ungrading. So that website is called chem21labs.com. It is an external tool because it does automatic grading of all the math problems. Canvas and I have just introduced ourselves to each other, and I am struggling. So yeah, it's pretty tough. But yeah, it's a separate website. But yeah, so the question, one of the big things is always, how do you find the time to give good feedback, if feedback at all? And so I've linked to a paper there that where in an organic chemistry class, they used pre-scripted feedback, and you still saw gains in student understanding. And so that we kind of used that, and we gave them pre-scripted prompts for the TAs. And so my TAs have anywhere from 15 to about 30 students. And it takes them a half an hour to maybe an hour for the people who add on to the pre-scripted comments to get the feedback in on that one question. Are the students reading the feedback? Well, the first question of every lab is, what was your feedback last lab and how are you going to use it this lab? A lot of them skip it, but in the mid-semester and the final evaluation, they are required to submit those, or I tell them if you don't do it, you're back on their traditional grading scale. And it asks them to summarize all of their feedback and discuss if they see any changes over time. And if they're applying feedback, we can tell because it'll go from like, okay, or you're missing this, to good effort, to great job, good explanation. And one of the questions in the reflection is show me the original answer and the feedback, and then show me your modified answer to show that you understand what we want you to do. Are students keeping up the work? For the most part, yes. Now, I said those students who have personal issues, they've been behind, and they're like, oh, well, this class has soft due dates, so I can push it off a little bit. But during the one-on-ones, they were like, I'm going to make it up because things have settled down now. So it gives them a chance to catch up as they want. And I don't see a difference between a regular semester than this one in terms of students that aren't keeping up with the work. It's just the ones that aren't keeping up have that hope where they're like, oh, I can make it up and still get an A. I'm totally going to do it. So now they're energized to do it, which is something I never see. Are they trying and not cheating? So the thing we've seen actually is because I made up all these remote labs. We had to get together chemistry kits where they went to campus to pick them up. So they're actually doing labs in their homes. And I had to code this all into Chem 21. And so the problem has been coding issues. So students aren't cheating. They're just frustrated with the software when they get the math problems wrong. It's also hard to cheat when it's all open-ended questions. How do I get student trust? Well, I really emphasize the relationship between TAs and students. And because the students trust the TAs, especially after the one-on-one meetings, the students trust the TAs and the TAs trust me. So I get a little bit of transitive property where the students are willing to go along with it because the TAs every week are telling them why I'm doing what I'm doing, because the TAs are part of the conversation as I do this process. And I do see your question. I'm going to answer it in 1 second. The hardest part is what I did last week, which is determining grades in one-on-one meetings. And that was just a lot of time. So I can talk more about that if you want, but I know I'm coming up on my last 5. So I want to say thank you to all of you for your time and willingness to listen to this. And some of Chem Twitter, these are people who either listen to me talk about what I'm trying to do in my class or help me solve problems or gave me ideas. And then as a reminder, I didn't start at ungrading. I started at the other courses where it was a gradual process to this fully ungraded course. It was really the combination of remote learning that made me take the leap. So if you have questions about what it looked like before now, I'm willing to answer that. But yeah, there's that. Okay, do I use rubrics for the students to guide their self-evaluation? No, because not in the sense of like good, satisfactory, excellent. I do what does your feedback look like over time? Like, are you still getting a bunch of okay, but you're missing some key chemistry concepts, or good effort, but can you relate it to your experiment? So it's more like a progress over time and the number of comments they're getting. And that's where that one-on-one meetings with me came in handy, because I could tell students, hey, I understand why you gave yourself an A, but looking at your work, it's maybe more a B because the feedback's not quite where I want it to be. So go back in, fix your answer, tell your TA you fixed your answer so they can update your feedback, and then I'm willing to give you the grade you want. But it's and so it's something I would need to refine if I did it again. Because yeah, there's definitely some communication issue around how the grading would be done at the end. Yeah, so yeah, and thank you for that. And I will stop.